Carl Jung often warned that the most dangerous forces in human life are not the ones we see clearly, but the ones we cannot see at all. He believed the greatest threat a person can carry within themselves is not open anger, not violence that shouts in the streets, but unconsciousness. It is the hidden shadow, shaping thoughts and actions without ever being acknowledged. And the person who is blind to their own inner world becomes capable of destruction without even realizing it. Jung noticed this danger, not in rare or monstrous individuals, but in ordinary people. He saw it in polite citizens, who convinced themselves they were good, while secretly carrying hatred. He saw it in political movements, where crowds demanded justice, yet were silently driven by resentment and fear. The danger, he said, is not the shadow itself, but the refusal to admit the shadow exists. When someone insists they are purely good, purely right, purely innocent, they place themselves in the grip of forces they do not understand. To Jung, the most dangerous sign in a person is the absence of self-awareness. It is the fixed smile, hiding a storm inside. It is the endless certainty that never questions itself. It is the loud moral voice that never looks in the mirror. He warned, the unconscious will always find a way to express itself. If it is not faced directly, it will burst out through projections, through blame cast onto others, through cruelty disguised as righteousness. Jung studied the tragedies of the 20th century, and he saw how millions of ordinary people became instruments of violence. Most of them did not believe they were evil. They believed they were defenders of truth, loyal citizens, protectors of their nation or their faith. The horror was not born from people admitting their darkness, but from people denying it completely. When the inner shadow is denied, it leaks out into the world as persecution, as fanaticism, as collective madness. In private life, this same pattern appears in quieter ways. A man who denies his anger unconsciously sabotages those around him. A woman who denies her envy secretly rejoices when others fail. A friend who denies their loneliness manipulates connections to keep people close, even at the cost of their freedom. The danger is subtle, because it wears the mask of innocence. One can go years without realizing that what looks like kindness is actually control, or that what feels like loyalty is only fear of being abandoned. Jung described this as possession by the unconscious. The more a person insists they are free of darkness, the more they become a puppet of it. They believe they are making choices, but in truth, the choices are made for them by unseen forces. This is why Jung urged people to confront their shadow, not to destroy it, but to understand it. To bring light into those hidden corners is to reduce its power. But when this does not happen, when someone walks through life certain of their purity, that is the most dangerous sign. For such a person never pauses to question their motives. They never stop to see the fear behind their anger, or the insecurity behind their arrogance. They continue to project their darkness onto others, convinced that evil is always out there, never in here. And as long as they do this, they remain blind to themselves, and dangerous to everyone they touch. This is the danger Jung wanted the world to recognize. What threatens us most is not the obvious villain, but the one who smiles while insisting they have no shadow at all. The mask of goodness can conceal more destruction than the face of open malice. And only through self-awareness does that mask begin to crack. Jung believed that when the unconscious is ignored, it does not simply fade away, it grows. Every denial, every thought pushed aside, every feeling buried in silence, becomes food for the shadow. And over time, the shadow does not weaken, it strengthens. What is repressed does not vanish, it gathers force behind the walls of the psyche. Then one day, without warning, it breaks through. This is why Jung warned, what you resist does not disappear, it persists, and it grows. The danger lies in disguise. A person may walk through life smiling, speaking kindly, appearing balanced and noble. Yet beneath that calm surface, there may be rage, envy, greed, or fear. And the more they deny it, the more those hidden forces shape their actions in secret. Jung called this a possession by the unconscious. When we refuse to recognize what lives in us, we become servants of it. The person who denies anger is suddenly controlled by it. The one who denies fear becomes ruled by it. And all the while, they believe themselves free. Jung saw this mask most clearly in those who appeared morally perfect. He wrote that nothing is more dangerous than the illusion of total goodness. For when a person insists they are pure, they cannot admit any flaw. And when they cannot admit a flaw, they cannot grow. What is denied in the self must be seen somewhere, so it is projected outward. The person becomes blind to their own cruelty, but suddenly sensitive to the cruelty of others. They bury their own jealousy, but become quick to accuse others of envy. They silence their own hatred, but see hatred everywhere around them. This projection does not remain small. Entire societies fall into it. Jung watched Europe collapse into fanaticism during the wars of the 20th century. He noticed that people did not see themselves as evil, but as defenders of truth and justice. They were convinced their violence was pure. Yet behind the banners and slogans, behind the speeches of leaders, the shadow was at work. Hatred denied in the self was directed at others. Fear denied in the self became fear of the outsider. And in that blindness, atrocities unfolded. But the danger is not confined to history or politics. It is alive in the private lives of ordinary people. A man who swears he never feels anger finds himself belittling his children without knowing why. A woman who insists she is only generous discovers she resents those who do not notice her sacrifices. A friend who claims they are never lonely slowly traps others with guilt and subtle manipulation. In each case, the unconscious rules from the shadows. The person does not recognize the chain around their neck, yet they feel its pull in everything they do. Jung's work revealed something difficult but liberating. To admit the shadow is to weaken it. To see it clearly is to loosen its grip. What is confessed loses its poison. What is faced begins to change. But what is denied becomes stronger. The dangerous sign is not when someone admits to darkness, but when they insist they have none. That insistence reveals a blindness so complete that the shadow is free to move unchecked. And Jung knew why so few people face this truth. To see the shadow is to break the image of the perfect self. It feels like death to the ego. It means standing in front of a mirror that does not flatter, a mirror that reflects greed, envy, weakness, fear. Most people turn away from that mirror. They protect the illusion of innocence, even at the cost of their freedom. And in protecting that illusion, they plant the seeds of destruction. For what you bury inside will return. If not in your dreams, then in your words. If not in your words, then in your relationships. If not in your relationships, then in the world around you. The unconscious always finds a path. And the deeper it is buried, the more violent its eruption. This is why Jung said, the refusal to see the shadow is the most dangerous sign in any person. It is a danger not only to themselves, but to all who cross their path. Jung often explained that the shadow is not some distant demon, not some force outside of us, but a brother or sister of the soul. It is the part of us we silence, the part we exile, the part we pretend does not exist. Yet no matter how far we push it away, it belongs to us. And because it belongs to us, it never leaves. This is why Jung called wholeness the true task of life. Until the shadow is acknowledged, we live only half of ourselves, divided between the image we show the world and the truths we hide. This division, Jung warned, is not harmless. A divided person is unstable, because they are pulled in two directions at once. On the surface they may look kind, patient, even saintly. But beneath that surface, another current flows, bitter, jealous, afraid. When the two currents move in opposite directions, the self begins to fracture. It is in this fracture that the most dangerous sign begins to appear. The more a person insists on their goodness, the more violently the shadow pushes to be seen. And when the shadow cannot be seen within, it finds its way outward. Jung called this projection. What is buried inside is thrown onto others like a veil. The liar becomes obsessed with accusing others of dishonesty. The weak man calls everyone around him weak. The jealous heart suspects betrayal in every glance. Projection is the language of the unconscious. It is the way the shadow forces itself into the world, when it has been denied a voice within. But projection does not only shape individuals. It can take hold of entire groups, entire nations. Jung saw it unfold in the darkest chapters of history. When a society is afraid to face its weakness, it finds an enemy to blame. When a culture cannot face its own greed, it invents a scapegoat. Hatred denied within becomes hatred of the outsider. And when millions share the same blindness, the result is mass possession. In such moments, the shadow does not belong to one person, it belongs to all. And in that collective blindness, humanity is capable of its worst crimes. Yet this danger lives not only in history books. It moves quietly in homes, in families, in friendships. A parent who cannot accept their failures projects disappointment onto their child. A partner who cannot face their insecurity imagines betrayal where there is none. A friend who cannot admit loneliness punishes others for their happiness. Relationships become poison not by open evil, but by unconsciousness. The shadow unacknowledged becomes the hidden architect of conflict. Jung urged people to see the shadow for what it truly is, not an enemy to be destroyed, but a teacher to be understood. He believed that within the shadow lies energy, creativity, and truth. What makes it dangerous is not its existence, but our refusal to look at it. When a person says they have nothing to hide, when they insist they are above contradiction, when they present themselves as flawless, that is the most dangerous sign. For the more flawless the mask, the more powerful the shadow beneath it. He compared this to possession by ancient gods, archetypes that seize the human personality and drive it without mercy. A man who denies aggression may suddenly erupt in violence. A woman who denies desire may fall into reckless indulgence. A leader who denies fear may become a tyrant of control. Each eruption is the shadow demanding recognition. And when the demand is ignored, it grows more destructive. The tragedy is that most of this unfolds in silence. The person does not know they are dangerous. They believe they are righteous, pure, even chosen. They cannot see that the very certainty they cling to is the sign of their blindness. And so they move through life, convinced of their goodness, while leaving wounds behind them. Jung taught that true danger begins where reflection ends. The person who refuses to pause, who refuses to question themselves, who refuses to ask where their feelings come from, becomes a vessel for forces far older and darker than they can imagine. For the unconscious is not only personal, it is also collective. It holds the history of the species, the instincts of survival, the ancient archetypes that live in every human being. When a person denies their own shadow, these forces slip into the cracks of their personality and begin to act through them. This is why Jung described possession not as a metaphor, but as a psychological reality. The angry man who insists he has no anger may suddenly be seized by fury that feels alien to him. The envious woman who insists she has only goodwill may feel compelled to undermine others without ever admitting it. The leader who claims to be selfless may be driven by greed and vanity in ways even he cannot see. They are not lying in the usual sense, they are possessed. The unconscious has taken the seat of the ego, and the person no longer governs their own actions. To Jung, this state was the most dangerous sign. Not open wickedness, for open wickedness at least can be recognized and resisted. But unconscious possession, for in that state the person believes themselves innocent, while enacting harm. They become blind instruments of the shadow, convinced of their virtue, unable to see the destruction in their wake. This is why Jung spoke with such urgency, because the unconscious is not passive. It is active, powerful, and when ignored, it moves with a will of its own. In the quiet of everyday life, this danger is everywhere. It is the friend who insists they are never jealous, yet who always finds ways to belittle your success. It is the colleague who swears they are never ambitious, yet who sabotages others to climb higher. It is the parent who claims they only want the best for their child, yet who secretly lives through them, shaping every choice to fulfill their own unlived dreams. None of them see their shadow clearly, and so each one harms while believing they are only helping. Jung believed this blindness was the true root of evil. Not the monster who admits what he is, but the ordinary soul who cannot see what he is becoming. For when a person denies their shadow, they cut themselves off from responsibility. If the evil is never in them, then it must always be in others. If the flaw is never within, then every failure can be blamed on the world. This endless projection creates conflict without end, for the person never sees that the enemy they fight lives inside. Yet Jung did not leave this teaching only as a warning. He offered a path. The task is not to suppress the shadow, nor to pretend it can be erased. The task is to integrate it. To recognize the envy, the fear, the rage, and to admit, this too is me. It is in that admission that freedom begins. For once the shadow is acknowledged, it no longer has to force itself into the world through cruelty or projection. Its energy can be transformed, its voice can be heard without destroying. But those who refuse this path, who cling to the illusion of their own perfection, are the ones Jung feared most. For their shadow remains hidden, and what remains hidden does not disappear. It waits. It gathers. It sharpens. And when the mask finally cracks, it is not a gentle revelation, it is an eruption. Relationships collapse. Families are broken. Communities turn bitter. Nations fall into hysteria. The unconscious does not forgive neglect, it demands recognition. This is why Jung said, the most dangerous sign in a person is certainty without reflection. The smile that never falters. The voice that never doubts. The purity that never bends. For behind such certainty, there is always a shadow. And the longer it is denied, the more dangerous it becomes. Jung's vision always led to the same conclusion, that the most dangerous sign in a person is not their flaws, but their refusal to see them. For the shadow itself is not the enemy. The shadow is part of life, part of nature, part of what makes us whole. To fear it is to fear ourselves. But to deny it, that is where danger begins. Denial transforms the shadow into a force that acts in secret. And secrecy always breeds destruction. He often reminded his students that every individual carries within them both light and darkness, both creation and destruction. To live fully means to walk with both. The person who acknowledges their anger learns to channel it into strength. The one who admits envy may discover ambition hidden beneath it. The one who owns their fear may find compassion for others who struggle in silence. In this way, the shadow is not only danger, it is also potential. But that potential is unlocked only when we face it directly. What Jung feared most was the individual who insists, I have no shadow. For such a person cannot learn. They cannot grow. They cannot change. Their life becomes rigid, and rigidity invites collapse. They live in a fragile house of mirrors, where every flaw is hidden, and every crack is blamed on others. And when the pressure becomes too great, the house shatters. The fall is always sudden, always devastating, for the person never prepared for it. This blindness spreads like fire when it moves into groups. The family that insists it is perfect hides wounds that only grow deeper. The community that claims it is pure turns against those who do not fit. The nation that proclaims its innocence justifies violence in the name of righteousness. Again and again, history shows the same pattern. The denial of the shadow does not protect us, it destroys us. What is buried always returns. Yet Jung's message was never only despair. His warning carried hope. For the same shadow that threatens to destroy also holds the key to healing. When we admit our anger, we become less cruel. When we confess our envy, we become more honest. When we recognize our fear, we become less controlled by it. In the act of recognition, the shadow loses its grip. What once seemed dangerous becomes a source of wisdom. Jung believed this confrontation was the true path to wholeness. Not to chase purity, not to cling to an image of perfection, but to stand openly in the tension of opposites. To be both light and dark, both noble and flawed, both fragile and strong. Only such a person is safe, for they know themselves. They do not need to project their shadow onto others. They do not need to hide behind masks. They are honest enough to admit their humanity, and that honesty becomes their shield. So the most dangerous sign is not anger, not desire, not weakness. It is the absence of reflection. It is the refusal to turn inward. It is the certainty that says, I am without fault. For behind that certainty lies the greatest blindness. And behind that blindness lies the shadow waiting to act. Jung left us with this truth, that the only real danger is unconsciousness. To close your eyes to yourself is to hand your life over to forces you cannot see. But to open those eyes, to face what is hidden, to admit what is difficult, is to reclaim your soul. And in that reclamation, the shadow no longer rules from the dark. It becomes a companion on the journey, no longer an enemy, but a teacher. Jung always returned to one final truth, that the deepest danger in life is to become unconscious of oneself. Everything he wrote, everything he taught, circled around this single warning. A human being who refuses to face their shadow slowly becomes consumed by it. They lose their freedom without knowing it. They harm others while believing they are innocent. They wander blind through the world, convinced they see clearly. This, he said, is the most dangerous condition a soul can reach. And yet, Jung also believed that within this danger lies the possibility of transformation. The shadow is not a curse meant to destroy us. It is an invitation. It is the other half of our being, the half that must be faced if we wish to become whole. Without the shadow, our lives remain shallow, brittle, fragile. But when the shadow is faced, when its voice is heard, something remarkable happens. What was once fear becomes wisdom. What was once envy becomes drive. What was once rage becomes courage. The shadow ceases to be an enemy and becomes an ally. This transformation does not come quickly. It is not achieved by a single realization or a single confession. It is the work of a lifetime. Jung said that every step towards self-knowledge requires a kind of death, the death of illusion, the death of pride, the death of the image we cling to. Each time we admit a flaw, a small part of that false image falls away. And in the space that remains, something more real takes root. Slowly, painfully, steadily, the self begins to take shape. He often compared this process to alchemy, the ancient art of turning lead into gold. The lead is the shadow, heavy, dark, unwanted. But in the fire of reflection, it begins to change. Slowly, the dross is burned away. Slowly, the hidden essence reveals itself. And what seemed dangerous at first becomes the very material of transformation. The shadow is the raw element of the soul, and without it, no gold can be made. But this path is not for the faint of heart. Most people turn away. They choose the comfort of denial, the safety of the mask, the illusion of innocence. They convince themselves they are already complete, already pure, already whole. And in this refusal, they remain at the mercy of the unconscious. Jung said that such people live half-lives, lives ruled by forces they never name, lives driven by motives they never see. Their danger is not only to themselves, but to all who come near them. For the shadow that is not owned is always projected outward. This is why Jung called unconsciousness the greatest peril of humanity. Wars begin because nations cannot admit their fears. Hatred spreads because communities cannot admit their envy. Families collapse because parents cannot admit their wounds. Friendships break because either side can admit their insecurity. Again and again, the same story plays out. The refusal to face the shadow creates suffering, and the refusal is always justified by certainty. Certainty that I am right. Certainty that I am good. Certainty that the problem is always outside. This is the blindness Jung warned against more than any other. But he did not end his teaching in despair. He believed in the possibility of awakening. He believed that each person who dares to look within, even for a moment, contributes to the healing of the world. For when one person integrates their shadow, they no longer need to project it onto others. They no longer need an enemy to carry their darkness. They become more honest, more balanced, more humane. Their presence alone becomes a quiet force of peace. Jung trusted that if enough individuals took this path, humanity itself could change. The work is never finished. Even those who know their shadow must return to it again and again. For the unconscious is vast, endless, like the ocean. We dip into it, we draw from it, but we never exhaust it. Each stage of life brings new aspects of the shadow to the surface. Childhood wounds, hidden desires, forgotten fears, they rise one by one. And each time they rise, we are given the same choice: to deny them, and let them rule us in secret, or to face them, and let them guide us toward greater wholeness. Jung's final lesson was that danger and possibility live in the same place. The most dangerous sign in a person is the absence of reflection, the refusal to face their shadow. But the greatest possibility of a person is also in that same shadow. For what we fear most in ourselves is often the very thing that can set us free. To turn toward it is to risk pain, but to turn away is to guarantee destruction. So the end of Jung's warning is also the beginning of his hope. Stay alert, he would say, not to the shadows in others, but to the shadow within yourself. Do not trust the smile that never falters. Do not believe in the voice that never doubts. Do not cling to the image of purity that never bends. For these are masks, and masks always crack. Look instead for the truth beneath them. Admit what is hidden. Accept what is flawed. Integrate what is denied. Only then does the shadow lose its danger, and only then does the self become whole. This is the path Jung left us. A path that begins with danger, but ends with freedom. A path that begins in blindness, but ends in vision. A path that begins in the shadow, but ends in light.